Spring is in the air and a sailor's thoughts turn to summer winds and lingering sunsets. But first, you've got to paint the bottom. Hi everybody, I'm Tim Cole, publisher of Practical Sailor, and this is First Light, a Ted Hood-designed Bristol 35.5 centerboard sloop. Known for their rugged construction, shoal draft, and wholesome, well-balanced lines, the 35.5s trace their lineage to Ted Hood's long list of race-winning Robins of the late 70s and early 80s. Like a lot of boats of this vintage, First Light also came with lots of layers of bottom paint. The original waterline was also a bit low for our taste, so in order to keep the top sides clean, we wanted to raise that a bit. We decided a hull restoration was in order, and we also decided to get the job done right. We needed to call in the professionals. Lucky for us, we met Ted Anderson, a marine maintenance professional from Stratford, Connecticut. Ted was able to answer crucial questions about product selection, the numbers and types of barrier coats we needed, how to schedule the job to ensure proper adhesion. Ted also supplied the crucial element of time and lots of elbow grease. Ted joined us recently for an afternoon libation aboard First Light. Let's listen while Ted describes what it took to get First Light into proper condition. For more details, watch for a story about getting a professional bottom job, including price details in an upcoming issue of Practical Sailor magazine.
Here you can start to see the differences between the colors where I sanded off with the 80 grit and where the sandblaster did his work. You can also see that we decided to raise the waterline in this picture. The waterline was 4 layers tall, and in this case we decided to reduce it to 1 layer. The goal there was to get more anti-fouling under the boat and keep the waterline cleaner during the summer. I use a rotary DA sander, dual orbit, and what it does is it spins in a circle as well outside that circle. And what it does is reduce the amount of swirl marks and sanding marks that you get in the surface. It's a very powerful machine, it cuts fast, and really it's the best tool for the job. A palm sander probably wouldn't have the gusto to cut through what we were cutting through. Moving ahead here, you can see that we've taken all the old residual paint off the bottom of the boat. We've already sanded out and faired in some of the epoxy filler. The goal with that is to make it so that it's smooth when it transitions in to the filler and back off of the filler. Some people will use a block. I choose to use a piece of foam, 2-inch foam with a piece of sandpaper on it, and what that does is allows it to contour to the side of the boat as you're working. If you just use a piece of wood, you're likely to get flat spots and facets, and that's not desirable. On the bottom of this boat, we didn't have any major issues with blisters or big problems, but we had a significant number of pitting, pits, voids, small little imperfections that needed to be filled. And in this case, there was actually more pits and voids to be filled than was reasonable for the job. So what we did was we made an executive decision to go and fill out the deepest, the biggest, and the most broad areas of the hull that needed smoothing, with a focus at the waterline and in the bow, because those are both seen the most and touch the water first. It did require multiple coats of epoxy filler in this case. What we did was we went through and filled once and sanded back, and realized that after we sanded, a lot of the filler was sanded away and revealed holes again. So we had to come back through a second time, and actually a third time, to fill in as many of those pits as possible. Here you can see that we've filled in a lot of the pits and voids. This is what it looks like after they've been filled and sanded back again. The goal here is really to sand as much of the filler away as possible, just so that you're left with filler in the holes, both for a weight point of view, a smooth point of view, and an adhesion point of view again later when you go to putting the inner protect on. We've already started here to remove the waterline. You can see that the winter cover is still in place. We've taped it up so that it's out of our way and we can actually work all the way up to the waterline. I applied 2 layers of tape to the waterline where I was going to sand up to. And this is important because if you don't do that, you end up sanding through the tape and damaging what's under it. The first layer of tape ends up being sacrificial. The second layer does the original job. So you can see we've sanded down most of the waterline here. As we wrap around the boat, we've done a nice job of trying to get a nice, even, white, smooth surface. And what this does is allow me to see that the boat's been faired nicely. It's not faceted. We don't have any weird voids or high spots. The brown in this picture in the waterline is part of the waterline that didn't get removed all the way. it was still adhered to the boat really well, and there was no point in removing it. It was smooth, it stuck, and we took off everything that wasn't sticking. So once we got that faired and smooth, it was time to come back and paint. Here we've applied the first coat of barrier coat. I've also applied new waterline tape. I applied the tape 2 levels high in this case because it makes it easier to roll the paint on. You don't have to be as critical about stopping. The first coat of barrier coat goes on gray in this case. We applied 5 coats of barrier coat, and each coat is an alternating color between gray and white. That way you are sure that you got a nice heavy coat and that you have applied coats, or you've applied the paint everywhere that it needs to be. In this case we used an Interlux barrier coat prep solvent. It basically removes any oils or dust or wax or amine blush that might be on the hull from the filler process or the manufacturing process. It's important to get all that off, especially on the first coat, because you want to make sure that the inner protect sticks as best as possible. This picture shows the epoxy primer after its first coat. I can tell because it's gray. I've used a 1/4 inch nap roller. It's solvent safe. It's very important to use solvent safe. The epoxy primer will disintegrate a regular roller from the home hardware store. The manufacturer also recommends using a 3/8 roller, and what that does is it makes sure to get a lot of paint onto the roller and then onto the boat. But I prefer to use a 1/4 inch roller because it makes a smoother finish. The waterline was very difficult to tape back at the transom of the boat. There's a lot of shape at the waterline, and it got to the point where I actually used 6 or 8 inch strips of tape to make sure that I could get the round around the transom. It was also advantageous to make many layers so that when I was painting again I didn't have to stop short and make sure that I was, constrained by short pieces of tape. This coat of barrier coat was the 5th coat. This was done the morning of the anti-fouling. It's very important that you have a window of 12 hours or smaller, or follow the manufacturer's recommendations based on the air temperature about the open window between the interprotect coat and the anti-fouling coat. The interprotect again is open to itself for a long time, so you can take time off in between interprotect coats, but you can't take time off in between the last interprotect coat and the anti-fouling coat. So this picture shows that we've applied our first coat of anti-fouling. The interprotect primer went on early in the morning, and we took a 3-hour break for lunch and then came back and applied anti-fouling. One of the things that's actually notable in this picture is that we've wrapped plastic and padding on all the poppets. The poppets generally are very rough and will not leave a nice finish on the bottom after you've put them back up to the hull. And if it rains while you're gone and you've just put padding on, then that padding gets soft and sticks to the paint. So we put padding down first, and then we put a layer of plastic over the top of the padding to leave a smooth finish in the paint, because you will put the poppets back up to the boat when the paint is still wet. So here in this picture you can see that we've painted the shoe for the rudder post. The decision here we made was because the paint had been applied there previously. We decided to recondition it the way it was taken apart. It was in great shape. I decided that it had looked so good because it hadn't been exposed to the elements in the past. So we decided to add the epoxy barrier coat back onto the bronze shoe and anti-fouling over it. The epoxy primer does work on metal, so in this case it makes for a good first coat. We chose to use Micron Extra by Interlux in this case for an anti-fouling paint. We had waffled back and forth between a couple different Interlux products, and ultimately we decided to waste no expense and go right to the top. We chose Micron Extra because it has the extra biocide, known as BioLux, and this product works really well in Long Island Sound. The water temperatures are warm here. We get a fair amount of algae growth on the bottom, and the added BioLux in the Micron Extra really does a good job of preventing that. It's not cheap. It goes very quickly when you apply it, but it does last for a long time. In many cases, if you have a nice solid 2 or 3 coats on the bottom of your boat, you can get more than 1 season out of it. Here we've begun the launch process. The boat's sitting in the travel lift, And it's notable here that the paint has dried all the way. If you try to sling a boat before the anti-fouling has hardened or kicked off, it's likely that you'll wipe it off. And the same goes with the waterline in this case. We painted new waterline and we wanted to make sure that was nice and hard and cured also. We applied a new waterline on this boat. We wanted to use a navy blue waterline. We used bright side paint, and we applied it using a foam brush. It requires sanding in between each coat, and the paint goes on very thin. It's important to put on thin coats multiple times. You sand between each coat. It requires sanding, and it's also good because it smooths out the brush strokes from the previous coat. Also, when doing the waterline, it's very important to use a tape that has a nice edge to it. And if you need to, it's okay to remove the tape in between coats and reapply it. Sometimes you'll find that the bottom paint or the waterline paint will bleed through the tape or underneath the edge. In this case, what I did was I painted all but the last coats of waterline, then removed the tape and applied a new roll of tape, and then I applied a new roll of tape and then put the last coat of waterline on for a nice sharp edge.
Thanks, Ted, and bottoms up. You can learn more about First Light's bottom job at practical-sailor.com. For Practical Sailor, I'm Tim Cole. Thanks for watching.